Thank you. Good evening. I appreciate being here. And I think I'm supposed to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we have a little bit of time for discussion. So let me get to the point. There was a film called Running Man with Schwarzenegger. It's based on a Stephen King novel written when he used the name, I think, Bachman. And how many people have seen Running Man? Okay. So it basically envisions a future where there's been a major economic collapse. There's dramatic polarization of wealth. There's reality TV shows that are absolutely sadistic. In other words, it sounds like now.
Yeah.
And every time I watch Running Man, I think about that is what's called a dystopia. That is an anti-utopia. But that is our reality. I mean, there's certain interesting things about the film, and I'm not going to go into that. But it basically envisions a future much like, and it came out, I think, in the 80s. And it's much like what we're experiencing now. And what's also interesting is that there's almost no resistance in Running Man, at least in the film. What you have are individuals trying to cut the best deal that they can under a barbaric system. Sounds like now. And so the challenge is, do we actually create a labor movement that's capable of providing the level of resistance that's necessary in facing this reality of this dystopia? And I put it very bluntly like that. This morning, or early this afternoon, when I started my remarks, I told a story that I always tell, that I think really symbolizes where the labor movement is. And it's the man that jumped off the Empire State Building. And as he passed by the 60th floor, he was overheard saying, "So far, so good."
Yeah.
That's our movement. I mean, let's be real. We keep dropping, and people keep saying, "Well, we're still here." You know, I've dropped another floor. The velocity is increasing, but I'm still here. Well, I'm here to tell you we're almost not here. It's almost over. It is almost over. That right now what we're looking at is that the other side is conducting the final offensive against us. That is what Wisconsin is about. That was about. That's what Ohio was about. That's what the Romney campaign is about. Is a final offensive. And we should be clear. I mean, we use all these analogies with things that happened under Reagan and no. Under Reagan, we were getting our asses kicked. Right? But Reagan's objective, and this is not to defend him, was not to annihilate the labor movement. It was to weaken it significantly. To basically provide the space so that there would be give-backs on our part, as we saw in one industry after another. But it wasn't to annihilate it. Now, however, we're in that moment that they call in the military the final offensive. It's when one side says, let's go for broke, that we actually can take them out. That's what we're up against. And the difficulty is that our movement and many of our leaders, we keep acting as if it's 1955. You know, we relish holding conferences in fancy facilities, having banquets with wonderful chandeliers, wonderful food, you know, dressing up, always making sure that, you know, dressed to the nines. And yet our members are getting their asses kicked. But you know this. The question is, what are we actually going to do? And it seems to me that we actually face a situation that was not unlike the French in 1940. after the Germans won. There were three options. One, you could collaborate. You could basically say, you know, we give up. We'll cut the best deal we can under the Nazis or the Vichy. That's one option. Another option was what de Gaulle did. You know, he called for resistance. He went to England to build his army. And the other was you could fight internally, and that was the Maquis or the guerrillas. The last two were about resistance. The question we have to face is, are we going to give up, or are we going to resist and defeat the other side? But doing it means that we've got to recognize that this is not a battle of equals. This is not where we have equal power. We are outmatched in terms of money. We're outmatched in terms of organization. I mean, let's be real. We're outmatched in terms of media. I'm not telling you this so that you will then drink the Kool-Aid, folks. I'm telling us this because what it means is that we've got to rethink strategy. We've got to rethink organization. And the first thing we've got to do is learn a very important lesson from Wisconsin. We've got to educate our members. Now, let me just say something about educating our members. Educating our members is not about handing out flyers. Educating our members is not about having a nice Facebook page or a website or a union newspaper. Educating our members is about recognizing that our members are intelligent adults who have a variety of different opinions and that we've got to engage in a dialogue with them, even if we don't agree with them. I'd say especially if we don't agree with them. That there's at least a third of union members around the country that consistently vote Republican. I'm in AFG, folks. I can't figure out, I am flabbergasted when I encounter a Republican member of AFG. It's like, whoa, what world am I in, right? I mean, knowing what today, this is not the Republican Party of 1965. Knowing what the Republicans are trying to do, I'm saying, how is it possible that anybody that's a union member could be a Republican? A third of our members are, at least. And therefore, we've got to figure out a way of speaking with them and winning them over to real progressive politics. It's not just about whether we win people over to vote Democratic or not. It's more about winning people over to understand the power dynamics in this country and why, in fact, they're getting their asses kicked. Because, see, the other side is providing answers. Anytime I hear a Lou Dobbs or a Bill O'Reilly or any of these other charlatans, they're providing answers to our members. The answers are wrong, but they're providing answers. They're providing a story. The story's wrong, the story's a myth. But they're providing a story. We often provide facts, but we don't put the facts into a story. So maybe what we do is we say, for example, that there's this great polarization of wealth in this country. That's true. But the facts don't speak for themselves. People speak. And people interpret facts. I mean, I was listening to someone talking about Romney, and what she was saying was, yeah, what's wrong with him being rich? See, that's what the other side, the line of the other side. What's wrong? It's okay to be rich. And further, it's okay for that 1% to be that 1%. It's okay because people want to believe that they can be in that 1% at some point. We've got to have another story. In the mid-90s, I was at the AFL-CIO, and I was the education director and then assistant to the president. And we were commissioned to create something called common sense economics. Some of you may be familiar with it. It was an attempt at doing an economic education program. And it took off, and we were piloting it and getting great reviews. And then the AFL-CIO cut the funding. And then the affiliates that said, oh yeah, let's do this, they stopped delivering it. And I realized, oh yeah, dawn breaks on Marblehead. I got it. We don't really need education. All we need to do is tell our members what they should do. But see, our members, they are not going for that. Whether they're progressive or conservative, they are not going for that. They want a discussion. And they want to have in the union an opportunity for a discussion, not to be treated like chumps, right? But a real discussion where they can put out their views and there can be some debate. When that happens, we're more than likely to be able to win people over. Unfortunately, AFL-CIO and the affiliates stopped doing it, but what happened in Wisconsin? In Wisconsin, we had, a third of union families voting for this idiot to keep him in office? Mm-hmm. Now, yeah, we can excuse some of it away and say some people don't believe in recalls. I don't believe in recalls, right? Unless someone's been convicted of like child abuse or something. But a lot of people, they can say, well, they didn't believe in recalls. But no, that's not a third. What we were seeing there was public sector played against private sector. We're seeing people being won over to a vision that said, even though they are union members, this guy Scott Walker was looking out for the state. And they went for the okie-doke. We are reluctant to tell a story. We really are. We're reluctant to tell a story about how workers in this country have really gotten their asses kicked. And that it's not about competition with China. It's about multinational corporations that may one day be based in the United States, the next day they're in China, and the third day they're in Vietnam. We don't, for some reason, want to talk about that. I don't really know why. We don't want to talk, like when all this stuff comes up about immigration, and we have some of our members that say, we're losing our jobs to immigrants. For some reason, we don't ask people, just for a show of hands, of how many people are aware of any factories that have been closed by undocumented workers. I mean, just a show of hands, right? Or show of hands of the number of shipyards that have been closed down by undocumented workers. I mean, just a show of hands. A very simple show of hands. And what about why people come here? I mean, this is one of the things that I find remarkable that we don't talk with our own members about. People get upset about Mexican migration. Some people get upset about it. There was a spike in Mexican migration in 1994. Damn, what the hell happened in 1994? NAFTA, right. NAFTA destroyed Mexican agriculture and the public sector. There was a massive migration of Mexicans to their cities and then north. So in other words, the policies of our government contributed to this massive migration. I'll give you a more controversial example. Before 1979, most African Americans, Anglo-Americans, any other person that was a citizen of the United States probably never knew a Salvadoran. I knew one before 1979. One. She was rich and I went to college with her. Now there are entire villages that have relocated to the United States. Damn, let's think about what happened after 1979. A civil war. And was the United States involved in it? Yeah. Right? But yet, we have a movement that doesn't seem to want to talk about that. Talk with our members. You see what I'm saying? It's like, let's treat our members like they're adults. I mean, people can get that. They may not agree, but they can get it. It's like Guatemalans. How many people knew any Guatemalans? Unless you happen to be Guatemalan, right? But could it be that all these Guatemalans came here because of one of the worst race wars in this hemisphere that was supported by the United States government, with at least 250,000 people murdered, at least. Some estimates go as high as 500,000. See, I think that part of the problem is we've got to create a story that counters what these folks on Fox News are telling people. We've got to tell a story that begins with the truth. You see, the other side, and that was one of the things I was thinking about when I was watching Romney last night, that Romney's not constrained by the truth. That was obvious in the first debate. And it was obvious again last. He's not. The right wing is never constrained by the truth. They feel completely comfortable saying anything that they want. They really aren't constrained because of complete deep-seated opportunism. Our story's got to begin with the truth. And it's got to talk about what's happening to workers and why, and who is to blame and who's not. And sometimes that means, yeah, there's going to be some differences. Yeah, there's going to be some arguments. But I don't see what choice we have. Because the alternative, to me, is the Running Man scenario, or a variation on that, where it's sort of the Hobbesian war of all against all for survival. That seems to be the alternative. So when I'm thinking about the future of the labor movement, and one of the reasons I co-wrote Solidarity Divided and then this other book, They're Bankrupting Us, it's because I believe deeply in the union movement. My parents were both union members, started me when I was very young, understanding about unions. And unions are one of the few vehicles this country has that actually can bring people together across barriers that in the rest of their lives keep them completely separate. And unions can be a mechanism, because we've seen this historically, to fight for economic justice, not just for our members, but for the 88%. That's right, the 88% of the workforce that's not represented. That's what the union movement can be. But it means that we have to transform. We can't operate as we have in the past. So, for example, I keep asking, why is the AFL-CIO not organizing unemployed workers? You know, we got a lot of people out there that are unemployed. I know enough about history to know that there's two very volatile groups that if you don't organize them the right way, they can go the other way. One are veterans, and the other are the unemployed. The history of the 20th century demonstrated that veterans and the unemployed, if they're not organized under a progressive banner, can often be organized under a very right-wing banner. Why are we not organizing the unemployed? And I asked the AFL-CIO, because they had a 5-city experiment, pilot. And I asked them, well, 5 cities, okay, that's great, but like, what about 100 cities? And I'm told, well, you know, there's no affiliates that really want to push this. Of course there's no affiliates that want to push this. This is not the work of affiliates. It is the work of Central Labor Councils. It is the work of the National AFL-CIO. It is the work of union bodies that go beyond issues of jurisdiction, but are looking at a geography and are reaching out and saying, we've got to organize the unemployed. Because there's a lot of angry people. You know, one of the things that's a real weakness in the Obama campaign is that they can't really talk about unemployment. Now look, I'm going to vote for Obama actively. You know, right? But I'm being real with you. I am not here to bullshit you, right? I'm here to talk bluntly. They cannot talk about unemployment. They kind of talk around it. They talk about what they will do. That's fine. We know what Romney and them will do. The problem is, what are we going to do? What are we saying? You know, I mean, really, it seems to me, and you can do with this what you want. Labor movements should be planning a march on Washington for jobs that maybe coincides with the inauguration, no matter who gets inaugurated. Maybe it's the same day, maybe it's the day after, right? Maybe we need to do marches for jobs in every state capital after the inauguration. But damn it, we got to do something. I mean, this idea that we look out for ourselves, we look out for people who happen to be in unions, that just doesn't work. We are 12% and dropping. You know, we're not on the 60th floor, we're more like on the 10th floor. And I see that ground coming up really quick. And it's scary, right? Because it means that we have to operate differently. And it means that the other side sees blood and they're out to take us to remove us. So that's the challenge. The challenge really comes down to whether the union movement can be the leaders of Romney's 47%. And in fact, whether we can be the leaders of more than that. I just thought it was wonderful that Romney just said that 47%. I mean, this is, you always want to capture those moments when these pigs basically say what all of us know that they're saying, but they're usually covered up in flowery language and a lot of makeup, right? So we finally got them to say it, that they basically believe that at least 47% of the population is worthless. And that includes everyone in this room. Everyone in this room. I hope no one thinks they're somehow outside of that. So how do we then start speaking for that 47%, getting that 47% excited? In fact, going beyond that, because I think we speak for much more than that. Mm-hmm. And I know that we can do it. There's been times in this country's history when labor really did speak for working people. In the 30s and 40s particularly, it spoke for working people. And then we lost it. We got into this sort of viewing ourselves as a trade association, looking out for whoever happens to be in a union. This is that moment. In 1940, de Gaulle went to Britain, and he issued a very famous radio broadcast where he called on the people of France to resist the occupation. He had very little in the way of support. He had very little to be optimistic about. But one thing he knew that had to happen was resistance. The Germans had to be ousted. We're at that moment. We're not going to be able to compete with the Koch brothers. This is an asymmetrical battle. We should stop crying about how much money they have. They're pigs and they got money. That's right. Now, the question is, how do we fight back and win? And that's where the issues of strategy and organization come down. People have done it before. We can do it. But we really will have to think very differently. And be prepared and be excited at the possibility that, actually, we can win. So I'm going to stop there and just open it up. Thanks.